my friend Noreen Hoft here with me today, and her husband had Huntington's disease, and had some experiences with law enforcement. If could you tell me a little bit about that, Noreen?
I sure can. My husband passed away in 2024,
Mhm.
and he had been showing symptoms of Huntington's probably for um, about 15 years overall before he passed. But in the early stages, we had our first experience in stage one when Mike had gone to a quick stop only about a mile and a half from the house to pick up chewing tobacco. Sorry to say, but that's
It's
what we do.
okay.
We have our habits.
Yeah.
And so while he was up there, it must have been that a person who was a clerk or cashier there at the quick stop noticed that he had an impaired gait. So he
Mhm.
must have been, in some way weaving or seem imbalanced. And so that person took down my husband's license plate number and called the police. So he came home and we were completely unaware. And all of a sudden, the doorbell rings and there's a police officer standing on our front steps. And he explained that someone at this quick stop had reported that, he was impaired. And he asked my husband, "So have you had any alcohol today?" And my husband said yes. And he said, "How much did you have?" And he had one beer. And my husband was 5'11", 230 pounds. And of course, he had the one beer, so probably shouldn't have been driving, but he did. And, so the police officer said, "Okay, well, it was reported and, that you were impaired."
Mhm.
And my husband and I were like, "What?" Just we couldn't believe it. So the officer said, "I don't see a reason for me to continue investigating this.
Mhm.
So just please, don't drink and drive." And so at the time, I don't even know, there's my dog, sorry. I don't
You're
even
okay.
know if we explained that he had Huntington's or not. We were just dumbfounded that this would happen, that someone would report we thought, you know, a nondescript, what's the word? Nondescript, a minor symptom, but they did.
Oh my goodness. So
Yeah,
they thought that he was drunk essentially
exactly. They thought he
at
was
the
on,
gas
yeah.
station.
Yes,
I
yes.
am I am also shocked that the police came to your house.
I know. That was just, I mean, came to the door. So he, maybe he was an overzealous young officer. I don't know. But he
Yeah.
had the license plate information and decided to come to our door.
Oh my goodness. So, was there anything after or before that? Did he have any other issues with law enforcement
Well,
as far as
after
like the
that,
readers?
and this was several years later, he had another one. And again, it involved a quick stop.
Oh,
Um,
jeez.
he was still driving safely and
Mm,
had gone to visit a friend.
mm,
And he was coming home and decided to stop at a quick stop
mm.
and get a Diet Mountain Dew, which he drank all the time.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And again, someone observed his impaired gait or, his slurred speech or whatever it might have been. And there was must have been an officer in the area. So as my husband left the parking lot of the quick stop and got on a highway, the police officer came behind him and actually followed him for a little bit and then put on the flashing lights and pulled him over. Now,
Jeez.
at this point, he was far enough into the stages of the disease and acknowledging that he had it that he
Mm,
happened to have one of those little business card size
mm.
cards that the Huntington's disease provides to people if ask for it. It's
Yes.
available, download on their website. And it
Hmm.
basically says, I have Huntington's disease. So if hear me slur or see me actually stagger like I'm impaired.
Mm,
It's part of the disease. And it says, if I need help, please call the person on the back.
mm,
Well, the officer, looked at that and he had been following my husband and didn't see any signs of major, weaving or, driving erratically. So he
Right.
basically said, okay, be careful and let him go. But again, it just really took us back,
Right.
surprised us. And, I live in Minnesota. We lived
Mm.
in Minnesota together. And I don't know if we're just extra vigilant as a society, but yeah, it was again another surprise. But he was
Mhm.
prepared with that card, stayed calm. The other thing is he still being in early stages of the disease had his wits about him. So,
Mhm.
if you get pulled over by the police, you don't want to do sudden movements. He kept his hands down inside, opened the window, answered, the officer's questions, but did not like in any way react
Right.
negatively or in an excited way or a challenging way. And I
Yeah.
think that helped as well.
Oh yeah.
Had it been much later in stages of the disease, he might not have had the same approach or self-control that he did back then.
Right. No, absolutely. And I've definitely heard some stories where people who are more developed in Huntington's disease,
Yes.
the story ends differently and it ends worse for them.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, but I'm glad that he had that card on him. I feel like that makes a lot of a difference too. Um, and I know that I'm going to include with this video, there are a lot of resources on the Help for HD
Yes.
website as far as educating law enforcement, educating the community on Huntington's disease. And
Yes.
I feel like educating locally definitely helps, especially if you have a loved one who is sick,
Yeah, I
obviously.
think it can, help educating locally. One of the things that I've observed, and I'm sure you have and the audience has, is that with the deregulation of cannabis and more people having various substances that might cause them to drive impaired, I
Hmm.
think the awareness is up. And I think that even our law enforcement people are probably being a little more vigilant in watching for signs of impairment. And in our case, I mean, our, HD warrior would not be charged with being impaired, but it could be, reckless driving or, in some way endangering others. So,
Hmm.
and that depends to a great extent, I think, on the officer who stops the person. So that
Yeah.
card can be very helpful in explaining things, but it's not, and I'll say it's not an excuse. It's not as they would say if you played Monopoly, a get out of jail free card. Because
Yeah.
if you are driving recklessly, no matter what the cause, eating a hamburger, correcting your children, driving
Mhm.
under the influence, or having, some neurodegenerative disease or condition that causes you not to drive safely,
Mhm.
you may be charged with, something. And
Yeah.
then, so that's something to be considered. But in his case, my husband's case, there were two nice officers, and he was, just mildly showing symptoms.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I definitely think what you said about driving is correct. Like, it doesn't matter why you're driving reckless. You can still get a ticket or go to jail. But I also think there are cases where just outside of driving that people with Huntington's disease, my mom, for instance, was stopped one time in a grocery store because someone thought that she was on drugs, I think, or drunk. I don't remember,
Yeah.
maybe both. But they contacted law enforcement because of that, and they thought that she was just like, making a scene in the grocery store. Um, but yeah, I think that it's good to have those cards on hand and to, like I said, if you're in the position to educate your local law enforcement, I think that's
Yes.
amazing as well. But but yeah, I definitely think that the situation, how it was handled with your husband, was just right. You
We've
know?
been blessed. We were
Yes.
blessed in so
Yeah.
many ways. And, also that my husband had not developed the violence and anger side of HD.
Yeah.
Again, these were early in the stages of progression of the disease for him. But I
Hmm.
know I too have read on Facebook posts people who have sadly that set of symptoms and they can get combative and it can turn
Mhm.
ugly really quick. So
Right.
yeah, we felt blessed and fortunate that we had the kind of interactions with law enforcement that we did.
Right. Well, even though, I mean, it's still though a pain to have
Yes,
the police be involved
it
on just a
is.
regular day for you, when in
Yes,
reality you just have Huntington's disease. So, it's still something that's very real, something that um we definitely have to deal with, unfortunately.
we do.
But
We do. And it was as the spouse, and the caretaker, it was unnerving and made me worry
yeah.
more about where was he in his, progression of the symptoms and to what extent did we need to have a conversation. Fortunately,
Yeah.
in our case, we never did because he just evolved in his own understanding and, backed off of driving, let me drive and things like that. But yeah, so as a spouse, as a loved one, as a caretaker, when those things happened, I was just stunned,
Mhm.
stunned and worried.
Right. Well, of course. And that's why I think these conversations are so important because,
Hmm.
um, we want people to know that it is a real thing and it does happen. But there are ways that you can be prepared for it. So,
There are,
um,
there are.
yes. So I appreciate you coming on and being so open and honest about it and talking about it, because it helps, the community. So thank you very much,
You're
Noreen, for
welcome.
coming on
You're
and talking
welcome.
with me today.
My pleasure, Leah.
Thank you. You have a great day. Okay.
You too.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.